Friday, February 14th, 2020, MONERO 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I want to talk about why I think HS2 is the proverbial gravy train and how I came to that conclusion. Before I start though, for disclosure, I'd like to say that I don't favor any political side, left or right. I'm apolitical. I have libertarian leanings. I'm for small government, sound money. I'm for the separation of state power and business. I believe in free markets, and I believe that government should be small and that government should basically administer the rule of law and leave the market and business to the free market. So just wanted to put that through there. I'm not against the Conservatives. I'm not pro-Labor. So earlier this week, Prime Minister Johnson announced that they're going to go ahead with this high-speed rail project, HS2, and very controversial subject. I saw a comment on Facebook. One of my friends put a comment and it said, "London businessmen saved the government billions of pounds building a high-speed rail link to Birmingham by arranging your meetings in Birmingham 20 minutes later." Andy Johnson email. I don't know who Andy Johnson is, but let's go through a few articles here that raise some red flags for me about this project, about it being a gravy train for the politicians, for business. And that's the problem when you allow government and business to be in bed together. It doesn't matter if it's left or right. The taxpayer always gets hurt in the long term. So the first article came out in the FT on the 11th of February. It says Boris Johnson promises transport revolution with HS2 go ahead. £106 billion project to be split in three with new high-speed north delivery body. This is from Jim Pickard and Gil Plimmer in London from the FT. So let's go through some of this article, not the whole thing. It says Boris Johnson has given the green light to high-speed 2 rail project in a huge political gamble, saying the time has come to have the guts to commit to the £106 billion project. It's easy to have the guts when it's someone else's money, when it's your money and my money. Acknowledging that it has been a difficult, controversial decision, the Prime Minister insisted that HS2, which has been hit by huge cost overruns and long delays, would deliver prosperity to every part of the country. I'm going to stop here and say that I personally think the best way to create prosperity is through the private sector, to allow the free market to function properly, to have sound money, to have a banking system that functions fairly well, a banking system that isn't leveraged like our banking system still is. After the 2008 crisis, with the collapse of Northern Rock, the bailout of RBS, nothing has been done. The Bank of England still keeping monetary policy almost at 0%. The value of our currencies continue to debase, and that's hurting the general public. Inflation always hurts the general public, but helps those near finance, especially in the City of London, politicians as well. They've been able to borrow and spend, continue to borrow and spend, and you suffer. So just wanted to put that through. I don't think another project that will probably have even more cost overruns just to save 20 minutes or so going to Birmingham is going to help make the country more equal. That's one thing that I wanted to put through. Let's continue. This is what Boris Johnson said. this government will deliver a new anatomy of British transport, a revolution in the nation's public transport provision, he said. It will be a sign to the world in the 21st century. This United Kingdom still has the vision to dream big dreams and the courage to bring those dreams about. Well, who knows? This whole project is supposed to be completed by 2040. The whole HS2 transport scheme. Who knows how much people will need to take trains in 20 years' time. Already now, for example, I do a lot of my videos, a lot of my contacts, my interviews. I don't have to travel to Detroit. Yesterday I did an interview with Mike from Rethinking the Dollar. He called me online and we did the interview. I didn't have to travel to Detroit. I don't have to travel elsewhere to talk to people. You can all do it through Skype or Zoom, and there are loads of other softwares out there. So more and more people are working from home. So I'm not sure this is the right direction. The market always is the best judge, I think, of resource allocation, and not a politician like Boris Johnson and others. The alternative, he argued, was to consign the next generation to overcrowding and passengers standing in rail lines. The Prime Minister ordered a review of the project shortly after entering office in last July. And this is the worrying part here. Since then, the price tag has ballooned from 56 billion to around 100 billion. So I'll skip now to the part that raised the red flags for me, and you see why. So it says a new delivery body called High Speed North will be responsible for construction of the second phases called 2A and 2B, which create a Y-shaped line to Leeds and Manchester. And here's the worrying part. The creation of a new body was welcomed by the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, chaired by former Tory Chancellor George Osborne. So George Osborne, he raised red flags for me. So he was the former Chancellor, or equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury or Minister of Finance, from 2010 to 2016. I remember well in 2010 when he came out with one of his first budgets. He said that the government, coalition government at the time, planned to balance the budget by 2015. And here we are now in 2020, and we're still running deficits, budget deficits, which are probably going to get even bigger thanks to HS2, thanks to more fiscal spending. Central banks are now encouraging governments to spend even more because there's not enough bonds for them to buy for more QE. So this was worrying. So some of you might know about George Osborne and his involvement with private companies. So I'm going to reference an article here from thecanary.co. And I've never seen this website, but they have a good story on George Osborne. And this is from January 2018. It says, it's obvious why the Evening Standard took Carillion off its front page yesterday. Just bear with me and you'll understand what this is about. So let's go to the article. It says, Carillion's collapse has made front page news across the print media, but not in the Evening Standard, which former Chancellor George Osborne edits. He's the editor of the Evening Standard now. Well, not for long anyway. While the evening paper put Carillion on the front page of its first edition on the 15th of January, it quickly replaced it with a second edition, scaremongering about the election of 3 new momentum candidates to Labour's National Executive Committee. So why might the Evening Standard choose a story about internal Labour Party processes over the collapse of the UK's second largest construction company. Carillion employs 43,000 people. It has debts of around 1.5 billion, and the Conservative government awarded it nearly 2 billion of contracts after it issued its first profit warning. All deeply newsworthy. Well, not only did the Standard's editor George Osborne support Carillion's takeover of Britain's public services during his time as Chancellor, he also earns £650,000 a year from a company that profited from Carillion's collapse. So it continues. Osborne and Carillion. Between 2010 and 2015, Osborne oversaw a doubling in outsourced public contracts. In 2010, there were 526 outsourcing contracts worth £56 billion. After Osborne had been Chancellor for 5 years, there were 1,185 worth £120 billion. In October 2014, Osborne enthusiastically announced a new deal with Carillion, which he said was a key part of Britain's long-term economic plan. Meanwhile, his brutal austerity agenda led to a chronic underfunding of services. Companies like Carillion overbid for contracts that turned out to be unprofitable, while fat cat bosses creamed off any money. Then in 2017, Osborne took an advisory job with BlackRock Investment Institute, for which he earns £650,000 a year. As Political scrapbook notes, at the time he registered his interests in 2017, he also expected to receive equity in the company. So this is how he registered his interest. It says, and this is from George Osborne, from February 1st, 2017, advisor on global economy to the BlackRock Investment Institute, Draper's Gardens, 12 Throgmorton Avenue, London, EC2N to the L. I'll stop here for a moment. Why would a politician become an advisor to a company that knows more about the global economy and investment that he will ever know? It's kind of suspect, in my opinion. I expect to be paid £162,500 a quarter in return for a quarterly commitment of 12 days. So he's expected to work once a week. I also expect to receive registrable equity in BlackRock in the future. I consulted ACOBA about this role. The article continues. Now it has emerged that BlackRock, the world's largest fund manager, is thought to have made 40 million profit by gambling that Carillion would collapse. I want to go over another story that shows how George Osborne has his fingers in a lot of pies and used his political position to enrich himself. And that's why I was worried when I saw that he's involved in this HS2 project. I thought to myself, this is not good news for the UK taxpayer. So this next article shows again how George Osborne has his fingers in a lot of pies. So let's have a look. This is from professional driver website, providermags.com. I'm not sure when this was written. It doesn't have a date, but it says David Cameron acted as Uber lobbyist in bid to soften London Mayor Johnson's private hire regulation. So London Mayor Johnson, of course, is Boris Johnson, who used to be Mayor of London. He's now the Prime Minister, so remember that well. So let's go through this article by Mark Bursa. David Cameron acted as a de facto lobbyist for Uber when he was Prime Minister, putting pressure on London authorities to drop tough proposed restrictions on the US taxi app, it was alleged last month. The Daily Mail also revealed that Downing Street officials failed to divulge the details of emails between the Prime Minister's office and Transport for London, despite a Freedom of Information request to do so. The allegations surround Cameron's close ties with Rachel Whetstone, Uber's Senior Vice President of Communications and Public Policy, who is married to Cameron's former advisor, Steve Hilton, and was godmother to Cameron's son, Ivan. So here's the interesting part. It is alleged that both Cameron and former Chancellor George Osborne put pressure on former Mayor Boris Johnson in 2015 over proposed tough regulations against the private hire sector, which would have limited Uber's growth. Most of the restrictions were dropped. Former Chancellor Osborne is also implicated, and it is alleged both he and Cameron texted Boris Johnson privately, urging him to tone down the restrictions. Osborne is now, in addition to his role as MP for Tatton and editor of the Evening Standard, a highly paid advisor to U.S. investment fund BlackRock, a major investor in Uber. Osborne is paid £650,000 a year for just 4 days of work per month. So there you go. I'm going to stop right here. And that's why I'm even more worried about HS2. I was already worried when I heard about it earlier this week that they were going to go ahead with this project. I remember hearing about this project years ago. It started out that it was going to cost 18 billion, then it went out to 30. You saw that last year it was projected at 52 billion or so, and now they're talking about 102 billion. So that worried me. But when I read that FT article and I saw that former Chancellor George Osborne was involved, it raised a lot of red flags, and you can see why. And I'm not saying this HS2 project will not help sectors of the economy, of course, construction, and the people that will be employed around the country, of course. But this is not from me. This is from Richard Wellings. And this is from the FT article that I was reading to you earlier. And he says, Richard Wellings, head of transport at the Institute of Economic Affairs think tank, said he was deeply disappointed with the decision. With HS2's projected cost ballooning to £106 billion, this is what he said, the costs are now likely to exceed the benefits, said Dr. Wellings, and the project is highly unlikely to transform the North in the ways that have been promised. Investment in alternative schemes, such as incremental improvements to existing infrastructure in northern towns and cities, would deliver far larger economic gains. So there you go. This is not me saying this. This is a guy from the Institute of Economic Affairs think tank. So why wouldn't Prime Minister Boris Johnson listen to people like Richard Wellings? Well, that's for you to decide. Personally, I think it's because this project is a huge gravy train for the establishment, for politicians. And if it's going to take 20 years to complete, you can bet that Labour politicians in the future will be involved and they will benefit. So I could be making the same video in a few years' time if they get re-elected, the Labour Party. But so there you go. HS2, the proverbial gravy train. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook, BitChute, and Steemit. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.